Hello, this is Brandon P.T. Davis, theatrical scenic designer, and in this Vectorworks tutorial, we're going to be covering the basics of textures. Textures in Vectorworks are what give the ability to bring life to your 3D objects. So currently, this object we're looking at in OpenGL, and it is just a white cube with no textures on it. So if you're not familiar with the render options, OpenGL is the most simplified render mode in Vectorworks. We can also change our render options to fast and final quality Renderworks. You can also build your own library of render styles, and we'll go over how we can modify these render styles in another video. If I were to click on the final Renderworks, what you'll see is it's going to generate an image where it will show the shadows and how light it's going to reflect on your model. Now I'm going to switch back to OpenGL because when you use Renderworks, what happens is your computer has to process how light is going to affect the object, and this process takes time for your computer to compute. So OpenGL is a simplified version of that. So in the resource manager, Vectorworks already has literally hundreds of pre-made Renderworks textures that you can select. I have selected 3 to start this tutorial. We have a glass, a stone, and a wood. So the first one I'm going to show you is the wood texture. So I'm going to just select this wood, and I'm going to drop it on our 1 foot by 1 foot cube, and I'll show you a few things that we can do just off the bat. So if I go to the object info palette, I could go to the render settings, and here we have our texture that we've selected. I could do the drop down and change the texture easily. It has the map type, the scale, and then the offset and the rotation. These are also similar to the offset and the rotation, where you can just quickly flip your texture. So the map type is basically showing how the object's going to be affected. We look at map, we have plane, auto align plane, sphere, cylinder, and perimeter. And realistically, my process in this is I have a good idea of what map type is probably going to be best for the object that I'm working with, but sometimes I have to play with it a little bit. Right now it's set to perimeter, and before I do that, I could change the scale and make it smaller, since we're dealing with a 1 foot by 1 foot. That'd probably be good. I could change the rotation. This is all just in the perimeter mode. We could do the same thing. So in plane mode, it's just going to base everything off of a singular plane overall the entire object. So we look at the top, our plane is a little bit, doesn't look accurate. Where on the sides it looks like an accurate wood grain. Autoplane will essentially choose each face and project the image of the texture on that plane. You can also go to perimeter, which in a cube-like setting it feels the same, but essentially it's mapping the perimeter of the object. There's also 2 other modes that wouldn't really make sense in what we're doing, but there's sphere and cylinder modes, which if you're working with something that is a sphere or cylindrical object, that would be an appropriate texture map. The other cool thing we can do is we can go to the top, and we could decide that we want to map like the top only. So I can come here, I can select the stone map. So now the stone is on the top face, and then the rest of the object is the wood grain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our Renderworks modes. I'm going to go to Final Renderworks Quality. And we can see the image looks a little bit more realistic. Now with our stone texture, I'm going to show you. We go to the Resource Manager, the stone texture, we right click and edit. We can actually change the parameters of the textures that Vectorworks has provided. So currently, the name is this long stonework, arrowway stonework, 008 field wall. I could just call this stonework for simplification of our file. And then we can adjust the shaders. So a shader is the parameters in which affect the texture. So a texture isn't just an image. We can also change the reflectivity, transparency, and bump. So if I look at the color shader, I can edit that, and we can see the image that the shader is based off of. In the drop down, I can also affect the color in Fresnel, or you can build your own color shaders natively in Vectorworks. The reflectivity essentially affects how light hits the object. We're going to keep it with the reflectivity of the image for now. And then transparency is how transparent the object is, which for stone it's not very transparent at all. And the image bump is essentially creates a physical texture that can be generated. So right now our bump is set at 20%. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the bump to 100% for the sake of this tutorial. I'm going to press OK. So now if we go back into the render, go here to Final Quality, we want to re-render everything. So just watch the stone and see it has a little bit of depth added to it. Not a lot, but it gives it a little bit more realistic look. So now I'm going to copy these three shaders, these three cubes. I'm going to change the map, the render map on all of them so that they're all, we'll set them to none, and then set them back to texture. So I made a mistake, sorry. We want to revert to overall. Now I'm going to apply the glass texture to this one and the stonework texture to this one. So the glass work has a lot of transparency to it. If I go and edit, we can look at the glass transparency, and it's set to 90%. So if I go to Render, and to Final Quality Renderworks, I can see the shaders look more realistic than OpenGL, and we can modify these as needed. If I wanted this to be glossier, the stonework one, I could go right click and edit. I'm going to change the reflectivity. I could change it to mirror, and we could change the mirror. So 100% would be really too intense, but we could change it to 15%, and I'll press OK. And now it's going to re-render it, so it's a little bit shinier. I think you'd be able to see it better if I went to our visualization palette. I'm going to add a spotlight just right here. Press OK. Change the spotlight so it's pointing directly down. Go into a front view. And so I think, what we're looking here is the glossiness is mirror glossiness, but it's too intense. So I can go back, edit the mirror, make it like 5%. So now it looks a little bit more realistic. So there's a few of the things you can do with the textures in Vectorworks. You can always go, let me go back to top plan view. You can always go down to the bottom, do a new Renderworks texture, and I could import an image. So here's a marble image. Now I'll change the reflectivity to mirror. Maybe make that 10. The blurriness, so you can always read these little dialogues. This dialogue says, the item sets the blurriness of the reflection. So you set this higher to make the reflection blurrier. So add a little bit of blurriness. I can modify it so it reflects a little bit of green color. And I'll keep the transparency at none. And we'll keep the bump at none, actually. So I think this would be a pretty good marble texture. Of course, we want to name it marble. Press OK. Go into our 3D view. We'll change this marble. And so what you see is the marbles are really small on the map. You could always just go through here and manually change it through the scale. So we'll take the 1, but it's better to edit and change the scale here. So I set this to 1 foot for now, and that actually works pretty nicely. Now if I go to Final Quality Renderworks, there we are, a little bit more realistic looking marble texture. So that's how you can create a marble texture, or any texture in Vectorworks. I think as you move through your knowledge of Vectorworks, you'll become more interested in studying how Renderworks textures can affect your model. But as a basic introduction, I think this is good. So if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.